Thanks so much, Kathy. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Jason Ellis. I'm the Director for Advisory Services for Integral Partners. I have 25 years of IT experience and about 15 of those 25 in cybersecurity and identity and access management. I've been with Integral Partners for about 3.5 years and manage the advisory practice where we offer advisory for IAM in total and also specific advisories for PAM, IGA, and other IAM areas. It's good to meet everybody, and let me go ahead and move on to the introductions for the panel. First, I'd like to introduce Matt Connors. Matt Connors is an information and technology and change leader at Southern New Hampshire University. He joined Southern New Hampshire in April of 2019 as the IAM service and product owner. He provides the vision, strategy, leadership, and management to transform and innovate the identity practice at SNU. The IAM effort that Matt leads up will drive, influence, and augment the broader university-wide technology transformation strategy. Prior to joining SNU, Matt worked at the University of New Hampshire. He held multiple roles there in information technology that included messaging, collaboration, infrastructure, and most recently is the IAM program manager. He enjoys collaborating and sharing knowledge with technology professionals. He has quite a resume of speaking engagements, including speaking at VMworld 2016 through 2018. Identiverse 2018 and 2019, the Boston IAM User Group, and Secure World Boston. Matt holds a master's in science and project management and is a project management professional certified. Next, I'd like to introduce Kevin Leggett. Kevin Leggett is a manager within the advisory practice at Integral Partners. He works in the advisory group that I manage. In this role, Kevin's responsible for helping organizations understand the current state of their IAM landscape, including business process analysis and technology reviews. Kevin provides guidance and recommendations to organizations on how to successfully address the various challenges associated with either launching or enhancing their IAM program. Prior to joining the Integral Partners team, Kevin held various technical and management positions within several verticals, including higher ed, and has over 15 years of experience within IAM. Kevin built the IAM program at Northeastern University and managed it for over a decade, during which time he was able to successfully position the program to quickly react to the various and unique challenges that impact most higher ed institutions. Finally, I'd like to introduce Colin Landrum. He's a senior systems engineer with 20+ years of experience in IAM. He works at CellPoint directly, and he specializes in the area of identity governance. Prior to joining CellPoint, Colin worked for several software companies, including Aegis Identity, Oracle, and Sun Microsystems, supporting higher ed. He also supported federal, state, local, and other government entities as well. Colin holds a Bachelor's in Arts and Computer Science, Bachelor of Arts in Computer Science and Mathematics from the University of Colorado. He's a certified information systems security professional and is a member of the Information Systems Security Association. So welcome to our panelists. Appreciate you joining. Let me move on to the next slide, and let's talk about where we're at today in this country. It reminds me of the old Jewish curse, may you live in interesting times. We're definitely living in interesting times today. We're dealing with a pandemic. There's, of course, other things going on in the world, like wildfires across California. There's a lot of uncertainty happening. There's a lot of priorities that are changing and affecting how we manage identity, as specifically in higher ed with the pandemic. There's funding uncertainties. We're having to quickly react to operational changes. There's just an elevated landscape overall. So what I wanted to do was start off with a question for each of the panelists. How about we go ahead and start with Kevin? So Kevin, if you look at the impact that you've noticed across the market for IAM and how it's affected the type of advice people are looking for, how would you describe the impact you're seeing with COVID and other emergencies that are happening right now and the IAM market in general and sort of any trends you're seeing in that space?
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, so again, interesting times. So if you look at the way things have progressed over the last 6 months or so, we've gone through various cycles when it comes to the advisory services and what people are really looking to accomplish. In the beginning, the March time period, we were really looking at, pretty much a pause where people were unsure about what they were looking to accomplish, what the next steps were, what their funding situation was going to be. Again, in higher ed, most funding situations are set in the March time period for commencement in July. Just really a lot of uncertainty. So, but that quickly turned around within a month or so into more of reach out on with regards to, I need to be prepared for what's coming next. I don't know what it is going to be next, but I really need to start getting things in order, whether I already have an IAM program in place, have I made the right decisions today and reevaluate those? Am I somebody who's, too late to the game where I really need to get going with something, just really realization that I may not be in a position to understand what's coming around the corner, but I better be ready for it. So again, a real, not a roller coaster, but really a pivoting of needs and necessities over that period of time, the last 6 months or so, with regards to what people are looking for with regards to IAM services and where they need to be and their program needs to be.
Do you think largely, Kevin, that organizations that you've seen, the higher ed organizations, are they slowing down IAM efforts? Are they speeding them up? Are they staying about the same? What type of impact are you seeing?
I think it depends on the size of the organization. So the larger schools, and again, maybe it's resource requirements, et cetera, but I think that, while institutions are trying to figure out what's coming at them from an IAM program perspective, they realize that they are going to play a role, whatever that may be. So they really are, as I mentioned, putting the effort in now, being prepared. And there are steps that we're going to walk through that you can do to be prepared without knowing what exactly the target is.
Sure. Okay. So let's pivot that conversation a bit to Matt, working directly at Southern New Hampshire, which has a large online presence as well as an on-premise campus. How have you seen the impacts affect SNU, and what has SNU done in regards to IT security to respond to them?
Sure. So the impact to SNU, we started off the pandemic just like everybody else, trying to prepare for what that uncertainty would hold for us. So that obviously resulted in the starting the quote unquote cash hoarding, if you will, pausing work that needed, that maybe didn't need to happen right now, and then we've really pivoted in response to the demand for online services, especially. I think the amount of uncertainties really causing a number of folks out there to reevaluate what they're doing kind of with their time. That commute time is gone for a lot of folks. And that, what do you do with that extra 2 to 3 hours of your day in some cases? So for us, the pivot piece for us was really how do we deliver, refocus the campus experience to our experience in the online space. And there were some successes and some missteps. I think everybody's going through those types of things right now. I will say that due to some planning, and my hope is probably a little bit of luck as well, that we really did find ourselves in a reasonable position to be able to offer at least a mimic of campus experience in those early days. And we've also spent the majority of the summer completely revamping aspects of campus delivery for online learning through our Innovation Scholars program.
So the IAM function that's new, as far as a named function, is it fairly new with your position?
Yes. So I was the first named identity role at the organization, and we've really taken steps to pivot IAM to be more focused as to our learners' experience. Especially in the online space, it's the first interaction point that people consume our services or even seek information from us. So the challenges that we've had there is to start to refocus of, when does somebody want to interact with us as an organization? How often do they want to interact with us as an organization? And then how can identity best support those efforts?
Do you think, and just interested to hear your take on it, since you were the first IAM named person at SNU, and you effectively stood up an IAM program, do you think that all of the changes that they've had to make in an agile fashion that you've positively impacted those projects because the program has been stood up versus what they would have faced 6 months ago?
Absolutely. We now speak a common language when it comes to identity. Identity actually means something to the organization. It's not just, it's single sign-on. It's how do I get my AD account? That type of thing. It's the how. What is my information? How is it shared? How is it looked at? And then how do I even assert preferences such as, preferred name, those types of things.
Right.
And that common definition has really allowed us to hone in on the identity, I would say tangentially related areas of the customer experience and what we can do to bring a better experience to the table, from start to finish.
Sure. It reminds me of what we tell folks on advisory that, if you don't have, for example, policies in place, then the people that are defining these tools and how they enforce policy is going to be who's ever sitting in front of the tool. And if you don't have an IM program in place, the people that are going to be making decisions around identity are people that really aren't the right people to be making decisions around identity.
Correct.
Right.
We really elevated the way of thinking and set up these policies and standards and really governance in general.
Right.
Around identity to be involving folks from the business. It's our advising group, our registrars group, student experience, all these different teams as opposed to, what was had traditionally been, an engineer's hands on a keyboard.
Sure.
Which, Jason, to your point, not necessarily the right person to be making the decision for the entirety of the org.
Right. Sorry, somebody say something. Oh. Caught some static. Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. Hey, Colin, if we switch to CellPoint's perspective on this as somebody who works at CellPoint, what are you seeing in regards to impact, especially in the higher ed space? How is CellPoint responding to that?
Yeah, so thanks. Kind of across our customers, our higher education customers, we kind of saw really a lot, kind of like Kevin, you were talking about, the March timeframe was kind of a slowdown, kind of a re-understanding of what's going on and how is this going to impact us, that kind of stuff. But then an acceleration. So those customers that were, existing customers came to us and said, we have to provide additional services that we weren't expecting. So it was really us reacting to that and then saying, hey, we need, for example, remote access. So some of our institutions that have our on-premises solution needed a way for remote users to get in and request access, to go through that process and have that governed access request. And so we came out with a tool that allows them to do that, and they can download that, put that in there for free, and allow them to get in and do those kind of things. So really it was for those universities that had, needed the remote access that weren't set up for it, we were able to respond quickly to that so that they could provide that access so people could come in and have remote access into the campus. So that's one side of it. Then the other side is for those that maybe didn't have an IGA program or weren't thinking about IAM or, it was a future item. They kind of went down the route, accelerated their process because they knew they needed to get that identity in line. Years ago when I first started in this identity space, I used to call it the I before E, right? It was the I before e-commerce, but that was back in the day. Now it's kind of the things that we learned in kindergarten, the I before E. You've got to have your identity infrastructure set up before you can do these, opening up your campus or opening up your infrastructure.
So I think that's an important theme that we might touch on a few times, is how having the appropriate IAM technology in place really allows you to be agile. And in times like this, where you don't know what's going to come at you, being agile is really sort of an entry fee in IT, right? You have to have the tools in place that allow you to quickly respond to things that you today don't really know what they're going to look like and what they're going to be. And this pandemic is a great example of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I guess what I would add there, Jason, is, as IT professionals, we're always quick to respond. We want to be as agile as we can. I think what we're noticing now, really from a strategic perspective from higher ed, is the entire business unit is now having to operate that mode. So again, they're operating in a fashion that they're not really that familiar with as well. So they're quickly trying to adjust and adapt. So they're looking for support in those particular areas, and there's an opportunity there to support that as well.
So what do you think, Kevin, then to that point, if an organization doesn't have a roadmap and strategy, and maybe even don't even have named IAM resources, or they're early on in their journey, you're in the middle of a pandemic, and we come to them and say, you really need a strategy and roadmap, and they say, we don't have time for this, it's a pandemic. What's the right answer to that, as far as what the best way forward is with those types of organizations?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is to fully understand what you're doing now. Whether you have a formal IAM program or an IAM organization supporting that program, the reality is everybody is doing IAM activities. I mean, those activities are more than likely, if you're not formalized, they're spread across the organization, but different people are doing different pieces of it. So I think what's important is that there's a better understanding of that process and what's occurring now. You don't necessarily have to change that immediately, but you need to at least understand what is your current state. So that way you're in a better position to pivot, because things will be thrown your way. You'll get them at the last minute, especially in this environment. And you're really going to want to have a full understanding of what you're capable of producing now, how it's functioning now. So that way you're building confidence with the various business units that you may not have all the answers, but at least I should be asked the question.
So it's a good point. It actually, when you were talking, it reminded me of, if you look at just about any security instruction or guide or methodology, anything that says, here's how to get your arms around this aspect of security, all of them start with the very first step of understand what you got. Right? All of them say, if you don't know your inventory, then or your list of cases that what's sitting in your environment, then you can't do anything. And so a roadmap, if you look at a roadmap and a strategy, it implies all of that work, right, in order to build it appropriately. So understanding what you got, where you're at, and even in a time of a pandemic is very important, so you can understand how to chart where you're going.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're not the knowledge, if you don't have that grasp and have the knowledge, expertise on your program, whether you have a formal program or not, you are not building confidence internally, and with any external resources that may be brought to bear as well to help solve solutions for the schools.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. All right, cool. So I'd like to, talking about, understanding what you got is one of the things I think we'd recommend folks do now. We put together a list of things. So what I'd like to do, unless somebody on the panel has anything else they want to say to this slide, is move on to the next one.
Actually, I do want to jump in on this. Kind of to the folks having identity practices or services or what have you being performed across the organization, whether you call it identity or not. Having that understanding is extremely important. And I'll say one of the pieces that we found very beneficial was, and I think we have it up on the slide, the reduce or eliminate barriers and handoffs. We really discovered that we had practices happening across 3, 4, 5 different teams. And that from a student experience standpoint, it was a very disjointed experience. There was a lot of, hey, I need to transfer you to somebody else type thing. And especially in the online space, that our learners and students really, they just view us as one large entity. It's everybody's interacting with SNU. It's not, oh, I'm interacting with the IT team. I'm interacting with advising. I'm interacting with the registrar's office. And by understanding who was doing what, we were actually able to reduce those handoffs, which really for us was a better customer experience. So when somebody calls in, it's instead of 3, 4, 5 stops shopping, if you will, to get their problem solved or what have you, we got it down to 1, in some cases 2.
Oh. Yeah, that's great.
Matt, I think one of the things you brought up around that was that, in these times, it kind of exacerbates your experience, right? So those little things, so back, a year ago, bouncing between 2 or 3 different divisions really wasn't that bad. But then with this, it kind of exposed that and said, hey, there are these things that we need to reduce and look at there. So.
And to shift off to online will always do that. It's always going to highlight any of those challenge points that exist in the quote unquote face-to-face experience. Transitioning that online without, perhaps at least some reimagining is just going to really highlight those pain points.
Yeah, I think what I would add there, Matt, is, if you think about switching to online, we talk about that, what exactly does that mean? So for example, it's not just duplicating what you're doing now online, because that is going to be extremely noticeable. Any weak points you have in your processes, whether it be the user experience and or the support experience the learners are looking to achieve with regards to support. So you just can't take something and migrate it / convert it to online. You have to rethink about these processes when it comes to support and user experience. And again, from our standpoint, identity is the forefront with the user experience. It's where it all starts. So you really want to be not having that backup per se of I can physically send them somewhere, obviously, but just thinking a way through the whole process of how is that being perceived by my learners.
Absolutely.
Great. Anything else? All right. So when we were putting this webinar together, we wanted to talk about things you could be doing now. We talked a little bit about it so far. And by the way, I just want to remind, I know Kathy said at the beginning, but if you have questions, go ahead and submit them as we talk through all these topics, and we'll go through them at the end. But we wanted to make sure during this presentation that we're talking about the things you can be doing now. And we've been hitting upon that so far, but we wanted to call it out in the material as well, and also talk about it. So things you can be doing now as an organization, some of them seem like, well, we should have done this a long time ago. Maybe it's not the right time for it, but really today is the best time to do a lot of these things. If you didn't do them in the past, you might as well tackle them now, because it really is foundational kind of stuff. For example, identifying and defining your policies. What we find a lot in advisory, by the way, is that executives' understanding of what is being forced via technical controls in their tools is very different than what is actually being enforced. So they think if they have policy or intent as a board or as leadership, that the tools are enforcing that, and often we find, no, the tools aren't enforcing that, they're not configured that way. And in addition to that, you don't really have the formal stated policies and standards when it comes to identity. So thinking about things like remote access, thinking about things like multi-factor authentication, all those different types of policies allow you to make quick decisions and not break what I call the risk appetite of an organization. Policies state what level of risk an organization is comfortable with, and as you rapidly and in an agile standpoint have to change things because of a pandemic or whatever the emergency is, knowing that you're staying within the bounds of your risk appetite is very important. So certainly working on those. Review and streamline your existing services and processes. Matt just mentioned that, and streamlining some processes. Build and complete an application service inventory is something that Matt mentioned a slide ago. You can't know what you have. You can't improve if you don't know what you have, right? Review your organization, develop internal skill sets, and work with IAM stakeholders to identify priorities. That's a good group of things that could be worked on now. If I were to go through the group, and I'll start with Colin, if you were to focus on any one of these or order them in any way, are there any of them that stand out that you would recommend organizations tackle now?
Yeah, I think we hit on it a little bit earlier around the building a complete, application service inventory. So knowing what you got and really knowing who has access to those, right? Where do users have an account within an application or a service that's out there that you don't even know who who has access to those, who has an identity in there, and getting your hands around your full identity infrastructure of knowing where you not only what applications you have, that becomes an issue as well, but then who has access to it, who has administrative rights into there, who has advanced privileges in that environment, so that you can get a handle on where the critical infrastructure is and who has access to it. So getting those two bits of information, to me, that's kind of the first step is understanding where all that resides and how we're going to get our hands around that.
Okay, so understanding what you got today.
Yeah.
Matt, how about your perspective?
I'll say for my part, I'll pick 3 or 4. Work with your IAM stakeholders to identify priorities. That's number one. Generating buy-in is absolutely the most important thing. The other piece would be to also work with those stakeholders, especially within the business, to identify and define your IAM policies, and really close that gap between that executive understanding and the quote unquote operational understanding.
Right.
And then really is the review and streamline existing IAM services and processes. I really love the picture we have on the right of the slide. You know, the pandemic, this issue, you know, what we're facing right now. You know, we're not going to have opportunities like this to really pause work and, you know, take stock about how we're doing work right now. You know, it's, you know, maybe going back and cleaning up that information from, you know, when you rolled out your IGA tool or when you rolled out a PAM tool, whatever, and, you know, quote unquote, clean the garage, if you will. You know, it's so few and far between that we have the opportunity to go back and, you know, fix past mistakes. Maybe it's a mistake you inherited. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of that in higher ed, especially. You know, and then the last piece would really be the build the complete and application service inventory. By understanding what you have and then kind of the where you want to go, you know, another ping for the roadmap is it's really working with your stakeholders to close the gap in understanding, gap in service delivery, and then gap to just clean up. You know, some people would call it tech debt. You know, maybe it was a messy implementation or something like that, but really take this time especially to go back. You know, either be a clean up data, you know, verify your use cases, so to speak. And then really just build buy-in for identity as a practice. The more folks start speaking that common language, the more that they can start to share what type of experience they want to end up ultimately delivering for, you know, their learners and students.
So I like what you talked about when you said take this as an opportunity. As serious and as sad as the pandemic has been, there certainly is an opportunity there. I used to work with a guy who was our manager of our data center services, and we had 2 or 3 data centers at the company I was at. And we used to talk about sort of that technical debt, messy implementations. I like the way you described that, and say, how do you unravel that? How do you unbake that cake and get that out of the data center? He says, you know, some of this stuff is so baked in. I almost would rather just the data center just, you know, burn down one night and we could start over and then do it right. And sort of that's, in a way, that's what you're describing, right? This is an opportunity to unbake a little bit of that cake, since we have a little bit of the cycles and are being more introspective about stuff. So I like that. It's a positive spin on a situation. So that's great. And Kevin, how about you?
Yeah, before I get into my selection there, Jace, I just, you know, the whole concept of cleaning the garage, if you look at what that process is like, it's nobody really wants to do it. It seems overburdening. You know you have to eventually do it, but you keep putting it off. So nobody really looks forward to it. And then when you go through about it, you know, cleaning things up, you're finding things that you think other people may use. I think the key message here is, you know, you got to let go of some of these things you're finding. And how do you let it go? You're really looking to streamline what's going on now. So I really would focus on reviewing and streamlining your what do you have now, your services, your processes, how are they functioning now? Because there is going to be change in these areas. You're going to have to be prepared for it. So you're really going to want to review it. It's not going to be something where you're potentially doing a major change now, but you are going to want to make it as efficient as possible, because you're going to be battling for resources with other areas of the institution when it comes to change. Another area is really working with the stakeholders. I think it's very important, you know, that you remind them that A, you're here, and B, you're going to play an important role as well. What you don't want to have happen is different business units are defining solutions for the challenges ahead, that they're bringing in potentially, you know, other service providers who are then going to define what your journey is going to be like. And they're going to make assumptions about what you can provide and what you cannot provide. Because they're going to be under the gun to deliver and deliver quickly. So you want to make sure that you have a seat at the table. So again, I think it's just a reminder that the role that IAM plays, and again, you don't have to have a formal organization or a formal program. That would definitely help streamline the conversations. But if you're the knowledge expert or the key stakeholder when it comes to IAM services in your organization, you don't be shy about raising your hand and saying, I'm here to help. And you just want to be in that role as an enabler and not seen as a blockage for getting things done.
I think that's key, right? I mean, if you look at how IAM moves in an organization, how it matures, it's always the case where a champion as talking to folks, telling them what's possible, telling them what's really the best way forward, and enabling them rather than blocking them, and actually providing solutions for things that some folks in the leadership side may not think are solvable. And saying, oh, we have this challenge. You say, you know, we can support that. And they go, wow, I didn't know that you could do that with the tools you put in place. So showing them where you can provide value, and then getting that win, and then using that win down the line to push your priorities along, like IAM policies and standards and things like that. So,
a true champion is, you know, for a program, is somebody who's not just being reactionary, waiting for somebody to come to them to solve a problem.
right.
It's somebody who has been all along, you know, trying to position the program so that it, you know, regardless of knowing what the challenge is going to be, better be able to support it. So somebody who's had the foresight to do those things in advance. The time I spent at Northeastern, you know, that was a big part of the program, was really, you know, we don't know what's coming around the bend, but we need to be flexible. So the program is about building flexibility. You don't want to be in a position where you're solely reacting. You want to be, when somebody comes to you with a problem, you've got a solution or solutions that may require major investment, maybe a tweakage, maybe you're ready to go, but you want to be seen as that player at the table.
Right. Yeah, the get it done kind of attitude where you're here to help. As opposed to, by the way, when I worked in cyber security, the parent of IAM and ran cybersecurity and IAM, we used to be called the group of no.
Right.
We were the group that always said no to everything.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be seen that way, right? You want to be seen as an enabler who's trying to just put up safeguards.
It is an opportunity, really. This, you know, unfortunately, it is an opportunity to showcase, you know, your knowledge and expertise in these areas and how you can help get things done.
Sure, absolutely.
Kind of goes back to what you were saying before, Kevin, around the picture that's on the screen there. You know, and Jason, you were talking about this, where, you know, there's some things you're not sure that you want to get rid of, right? We've got, you know, an old vacuum cleaner in there, and my gosh, I could use that someday. And it goes the same lines with your IAM world. It's, you know, I've got this solution that we've had in place forever, and it kind of works. It has issues, but it does this, or maybe it's not even IAM. It just tangentially works with it, and it's like, you know, it's time to you know, move that aside, and time to, you know, and this is a great time and a great analogy with that picture of being able to go through there and say, yeah, there's some things we just need to get out of here.
I mean, solutions were defined and delivered in the past, and they were the right solutions at that time for those circumstances. And the reality is that circumstances change, and you need to move along and let go.
Right.
Yeah, the old saying, I think, fits here, that what got you here won't get you there.
Exactly.
So you deployed what you needed to deploy to get to today, and now you need to look at the future, and that's a different roadmap and a different tool set. Often. All right. Any other comments on this slide before we move on from the panelists? All right. So we've got looking ahead here, and this is the last slide before the Q&A. I wanted to leave time for the Q&A, and it looks like we're tracking well. But we wanted to talk about looking ahead, sort of some closing thoughts about, okay, we've talked about the importance of IAM. The folks on the call are most of them are IAM folks, and so they understand that. But we've talked about the pandemic, how it's affected your organization and your business, what things you can do about it today. Let's talk about sort of looking ahead and looking into the future as much as possible. I mean, I know the graphic there is a crystal ball, and so much of this is you know, best guess kind of a thing. But generally speaking, what we wanted to highlight was, one, that you need a solid IAM program. If you want to react to things like the pandemic, and I say things like because we don't know what the future will hold, but emergencies like the pandemic, having an IAM program and to the second point there, an IAM roadmap really is important. You know, if you're carving out a program, you're carving out a roadmap, you can truly say all is not lost. We have a plan. We know which way we're moving forward, and to what Kevin said prior, we may not know what's coming, but we know we're as agile as we can be to react to that. And so in the long-term perspective of things, knowing where you're going and why you're going there, and putting up the guardrails and understanding what your roadmap is and what your strategy is really means that during all of this, you still can provide value and provide solutions, and as was mentioned before, be an enabler instead of a blocker. I would love for each of you, maybe we'll start with Matt this time, to sort of take a look in your crystal ball and tell us what you think looking ahead should be the main things that the folks that are listening on this call should focus on, and the best way forward, and any advice you could give.
Sure. So I'll say for my part, the biggest thing is the kind of interplay between that IAM program and the roadmap. It's the roadmap is really, it's meant to be a communication tool. It's meant to build confidence and be clear in, what value you are delivering. But also, this thing isn't, it's I wrote one and that's it. And that's what we're doing for the next 3 years. This is a living document. As the past 6 months, I think, have shown us that priorities can change rapidly, in some cases in, a matter of days. And really just showing the great, this was our roadmap and this is what we've done based on, feedback you have with your key stakeholders, and just showing them the impact of those transitions. So, if you had something that was, a priority sometime in January and stakeholder was really looking forward to that deliverable, that outcome, just saying, hey, because of, our current reality, this is what we've shifted to the roadmap. And just so we've had to deprioritize for now that thing we were going to deliver. Oh, but by the way, this is all the other things that we've delivered in the meantime. And really just focusing on, it's almost telling a better story to your stakeholders. And by having that continuity and story and understanding, you really, to me, that is the thing that builds the most confidence, that when someone comes to you and they ask you for something, they know it's going to get done, and they are informed of the how and the when it gets done, and really making them feel that they have, buy-in and at least a piece of ownership in your identity practice. And that to me allows stuff like this, when just massive sea change type things come through, where everybody doesn't feel as bad of like, oh, I didn't get what I wanted, or I didn't get this, I didn't get that. But instead being already bought into the fact that, yep, we really have to shift how we're looking at this. Mm-hmm. And I know that, when, Matt or Colin or Kevin says, this is what we're going to do to change it, then it's going to happen. That's going to get done.
Right. Yeah, in a lot of ways, a roadmap is sort of like a contract with stakeholders, right? You're showing them capabilities that you promised to deliver, and they're giving you money to deliver them. And you're getting their support and their funding, and then if you can show a track record of actually hitting those capabilities, then your ability to secure funding improves, because people know the investment's going to be worth it, because they know what they're going to get out of it. So certainly a good point there. Colin, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, to add on to that, what Matt was saying, and Brad, you have that roadmap, you have that contract, and I like that analogy, but it allows you to have the change orders associated with that contract. We know that things are going to change. We know that stuff's going to be different. Mm-hmm. And the last 6 months have really changed that drastically, right? Some things changed very quickly and quite different than we expected. So, having that ability, and really when you're looking to the future, having the identity governance, identity infrastructure in place so that you can be agile and make those changes, right? If we need to go from a service where, like Matt was talking about earlier, where we have multiple touch points and people, in-person activities that needed to happen, and we can change those processes and those business processes to be more agile and more online, and really having a governance solution in place that allows you to do that allows you to drive forward like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a motif we've covered a little bit on this call, is how quickly you can respond, because that's really what you're trying to get to, right? A roadmap is a means to an end, is to have tools in place so that you can quickly respond to things as they happen. I will tell you that we have a client that we've worked with in the past that was spinning up an advisory project, and we knew they had a lot of work and a lot of tools they needed to deploy. Today they're doing IAM. This organization is doing IAM with a team of 30 people, just doing it all manually. That's how they provisioned all their accounts and do all of that. And we were actually doing advisory, and we're about to recommend IGA and having them automate those processes, and then the pandemic hit. And they all of a sudden had to move, 5,000 IT employees, IT and corporate employees remote, and had to do it all manually. And if they'd had a tool in place, like a SailPoint IIQ kind of a tool, then they could have created a workflow, clicked the button, and it would have just done it. And they knew that, by the way. They realized that they were about 6 or 7 months too late on the IGA train to take advantage of the time. So certainly having tools in place helps you be agile, because the tools are agile and they allow you to do that. Kevin, did we cover you?
Yeah, pretty much. I guess what I would add here is, if you're listening to us speak about this and you're talking about Nirvana, somebody else has got an IAM program and an organization, and they've made these investments, and I'm not there yet. I've just begun the journey. Am I too late to the game? And the answer is obviously no. Again, as I mentioned before, IAM is occurring within your organization, okay, within that institution. It's a question of really understanding the different pieces. I mean, ultimately, services are being provided. However, that whole dynamic on how that's occurring is changing. So it's never too late, to get yourself dealt into the table, I guess is what I would say. It is an investment. It's not necessarily a huge financial investment. If we look at some of the activities we talked about earlier, and listing those are things, house cleaning is, manual work, not a large resource investment other than time. And our understanding is people may have the time right now. Now, I realize a lot of institutions are preparing for back to school starting shortly, but then it'll be what happens when that is done, probably the third week of September or so. What's coming up next. And I guess what I would say is, it's never too late to begin this process, because it's not got a finite end. It's always changing. It is an investment, and it's quite frankly just the right thing to do.
Those are great points. I really like that, Matt, you mentioned a lot, getting a seat at the table, making sure that you're talking to the right folks. Kevin, you're reinforcing that. I think that the key here is to don't let this quote unquote pause really pause you, right? The idea is that the IAM has a lot to offer when it comes to helping organizations navigate emergencies, because identity is how people interact with your organization. And so they should have a seat at the table. And if they don't, you should be pushing for that and identifying stakeholders and networking with people in the organization that can make decisions around your IAM program. Stand it up if you haven't stood it up. I think that one thing that's important to be aware of is, as you mentioned, Matt, you mentioned that the roadmap is a living document. Absolutely true. We even offer advisory from Integral Partners that's specifically around refreshing your roadmap. So if you have a roadmap and you need an organization like us to take a look at it and say, this is trending right, you're tracking this way, the technology's changed, your use cases have changed, let's update your roadmap to reflect that. That's with the idea that we understand that it is absolutely a living document. So be working with your stakeholders, take a look at your roadmap, update it based on the pandemic and what you know today, and then offer value. And with that value, in your IAM program that you have in place allows you to really provide solid deliverables to your organization that makes their life easier and makes them dealing with a pandemic a little easier, because you can take things off of their plate that they thought weren't possible or would be manual or would be just a real drudge. You're managing via IAM tools. So that's my perspective. Is don't. The overall theme I'm hearing from everybody on the panel is don't pause during this pause and don't give up. Find your stakeholders, get your roadmap and program in place, update it if needed, and be ready to move forward. I hope I captured that. Did I miss anything?
I agree.
That was great.
Okay, awesome.
Nailed it.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I see a few questions here, so let me move to the official audience Q&A slide. And let me move this. Whoops. I gotta mess up here. Hold on a second. There we go. Audience Q&A. All right, let me go to the questions. I'm gonna pull them over here so you're not reading ahead because that's cheating. All right. So the first question I'll ask for Matt. Are there any key activities that you've done that have brought great insight and value as you grew your online education? Any key lessons learned?
Yeah, the big pieces for us were understanding our use cases.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, we're a higher ed organization, so obviously, we have the third party, we have employees, we have faculty, and then students. Within our students, we really have several distinct, types of students, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And the key finding for us was talking to the folks who can really be that voice of the customer, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And, with such a large number of students, it would be hard for us to get a representative, kind of sample size, if you will. However, we did find that, finding those stakeholders that really represent students was a huge piece for us. And for us, that's our academic advisors. They're assigned to our students at the beginning of their journey with us, and they really stick with them as they progress, be it through their degree program or what have you. And those folks were just a wealth of knowledge for us on, hey, this piece is a pain point for them. The transition to graduate it's a confusing process, and there's a lot of handoffs, or there's a lot of changes, or they have to click through 4 different systems, which, is confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to talk with those folks, they were just a wealth of understanding for us. And they really started to shift some of those early days assumptions that we had. I think that kind of almost comes back to that, the executives have a certain viewpoint, and then the operational team has a different viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
The thought versus reality, if you will. And those learnings for us were huge. And in talking with those folks, and they really shifted a lot of the way we prioritize work, especially in terms of like, yep, we got to fix this early on, or hey, maybe this can wait, and we'll bring something else from the roadmap up earlier. That was a huge piece for us.
I like that. It's almost like you have a proxy stakeholder at the table with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's funny that it's the advisors. Makes sense, right? If you can't get students at the table, get the people that students complain to.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
That's great. Awesome. So, okay, let me follow up with another question for Colin, or a question for Colin. This is a two-parter. So let's bring it up, Colin. So by going through the steps we should be doing, how do you impact and benefit buying an IGA solution like SailPoint? Let me see if I can parse that better. By going through the steps we should be doing, how do you impact? What is the impact and benefit of buying an IGA solution? If I already have an IGA solution like SailPoint, what are the benefits of doing these activities versus not having a SailPoint solution?
Yeah, so we hit on those a little bit in the beginning. It was really around, if you don't have an IGA solution like a SailPoint in place, it's really around understanding what you have in the environment, building out that roadmap, and regardless of what solution, but building out, what components you have, what systems, what applications, all that kind of infrastructure stuff, and knowing that obviously SailPoint can help out with that. We have our different components that we have around certification and those kind of things, where we can go through and do an attestation type review of users, what their access may be in a read-only format, where we're not actually going out and updating anything, changing anything, but being able to get that inventory and electronically understand where identities are at, who has access, what credentials are out there, who has privileged accounts. Just having that inventory helps. So if there is something in place, and we mentioned that, where if you have it in place, like our customers that had SailPoint in place and then they had to pivot, and Matt, you talked about this the other day around, your IT workers may be inside, right? And then all of a sudden they're working at home, and you weren't planning on that. You planned on your students, right? That's kind of the given. They're kind of out there. They're accessing systems, so you're used to that. But then the IT staff, of how do they get access to those internal systems, and how do you, you didn't have 100% on VPN, so now you've got 100% on VPN. How do you manage that? How do you handle that not only from a infrastructure perspective, but from an identity perspective as well. And Jason, you mentioned it around, you got a workflow and you add information to the workflow and you change that and make it do what you need it to do. And then it goes out and does that provisioning where you don't have to do the manual processes.
Right.
And so, and just rectifying those and knowing where those manual processes are and how can we automate those processes.
Sure. Yeah, that's the old saying, people process technology, right?
Yep.
And even if you don't have the technology, you can at least start working on the people and process portion.
Exactly.
For sure. So this next question, I really like the question. It's wittily written, which is a thing I'm a sucker for. I think all three of you will have an opinion on this, so I'd love to hear from all three of you. I'll start with Kevin. Kevin, it says higher education seems to have an allergy to standards and policies, which that cracked me up. How do you get them to realize that standards, policies, and complete data is where you start? That's the foundation on which you build identity on.
Yeah, so as somebody who's been in numerous verticals, including almost 20 years in higher ed, so higher ed is the endless debate. Ultimately, who's going to be the decider? Who's going to be the decision makers? So it's, it's just extremely important to ensure that, as you mentioned earlier, Jason, that if you do not have these in place, ultimately the person at the keyboard is going to make these decisions. And these decisions are high-risk decisions for your institution. And it's really, quite honestly, unacceptable in this day and age to be allowing that to happen, putting your business at risk, your business being the education of individuals at risk based on the fact that you allowed somebody who's just trying to do the best they can without guidance from above, without these in place, to make these decisions. So it's just, it's important for a couple of reasons. One, to communicate confidence again throughout the institution that you're on top of things, you know what you're doing. Two, to send a message down below that they're getting guidance from above, that you're not left alone to make these decisions on your own. I think it's very important that those individuals actually participate in the process, right? So they're not just dictated from above. But it's just very important that as an institution, you just all come together and make these decisions. And I realize, and again, I mentioned time in several verticals that, I've heard it out there. Higher ed, you're slower to get things done, slower to make decisions. I don't necessarily agree with that. I just think there has to be some real focus and priority setting on getting these done. And again, these policies and procedures are not a high cost financial wise process. It's really just getting people together and again, evaluating what you're doing now and making sure that, is this what you want to be doing? And then documenting what your requirements and expectations are in these areas. It's a journey. It's not, you have to handle it and nail it all at once. You just want to start that process. It does take some time, but that's all it's taking is time and discussion. It's really no other cost associated with it. The second part of the question.
How do you get them to realize the standards, policy, and complete data is where you start? That's the foundation on which you build identity on.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to, solutionize, provide a solution to a problem, and then go back after the fact and then try to change it with standards and policies. Now, just to be clear, we talked about being an enabler. So we don't want to be utilizing the inability to have a standard and policy prevent work from getting done. But it just highlights that you at least need to be putting effort into having the process in place. Because that will take time to bring individuals together to make that happen. And again, it's one of those activities when you're cleaning out the garage. It's just something you have to do from time to time. And you have to make that initial investment to make it worthwhile.
Great. Anything you want to add to that, Matt?
Oh yeah,
We'll do Matt and Colin. We'll get you both.
I love this. I agree that I really love this question and very much so agree with it. The most successful thing for me in communicating basically the value of this is why am I participating in this thing to build policies and standards? It's because I think you're going to find a lot of people in your organization have an opinion about how something and how you do business and how you offer your student experience, how that should work. And really policies and standards are the quote unquote physical embodiment of those wants. And by showing them that, hey, if you give me this time by helping me, develop these policies and standards, providing that leader or whoever to sit on that governing body, we'll then take these things and then through the roadmap, actually make them happen and actually communicate back the outcomes that you're delivering for these people. Listen, I solved your problem. When you tell me students don't like the transition to graduate process, hey, we fixed that problem for you. And we fixed that by saying, identity data or whatever will flow through this system or will be managed through this process or, what have you. Really, I think whoever asked the question nailed it when they said foundation. It is the foundation, and it's just communicating the fact that, hey, that change you want to see, that new outcome, that improved experience or whatever, policies and standards are the start point to make that happen. And if you give me the time and effort for this, it will pay returns for you, hopefully many times over.
Right, great, thank you. Colin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, to add on to what Matt was saying just there, and it's really when you define those policies and procedures, and I think a lot of universities get into this, they want to define everything, right, and have everything in place, and you need to understand that you're going to have policies, but there needs to be exceptions to those policies. There are the special cases, right? There's always these special cases that have to, you have to have policies in place, and those have to be very strong policies, but you have to have the capability to have exceptions to those. The ability for people to get additional access or to remove access and things, from an identity perspective, where they may not need or have an inherent need, a birthright need for an access, but you need that way for them to get that, and a way to manage those special cases.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I'm looking at the time and it looks like we've run out of time. When we got on the topic that happens to be my particular area, sort of pet peeve, I can go forever on IAM policy and process. That was a great question. Thank you. I appreciate the panelists' time. I know we're recording this event, and I'll turn it over to Kathy now to close it out and give any logistics on future emails, et cetera. Kathy?
Thanks, Jason. And thanks everybody for your time today. We hope you found it valuable, and we will send out a follow-up email with the recording.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah,
Be
bye.
safe.